Hi everyone, I'm Steve Bellin-Oka, and thanks for joining me today for this edition of the Bad Mouth Reading Series, and thank you to Rebecca Aronson for asking me to share my work with you today. I'm coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm currently a Tulsa Artist Fellow in Poetry, and that is a program of a foundation here, the George Kaiser Family Foundation, that brings artists, both visual and literary, to Tulsa to live and work in certain neighborhoods in an effort to revitalize those neighborhoods and to interact with the community through workshops, readings, panel discussions, exhibitions, and those sorts of things. I'm going to be reading mostly today from my first book of poems, which is called Instructions for Seeing a Ghost. It was published by the University of North Texas Press in February of 2020 and was the winner of the 2019 Vassar Miller Prize in Poetry. I'm also going to read a little bit from my most recent chapbook, which is called Out of the Frame, and is poems that I wrote while a Poets in the Parks Fellow for the National Arts Parks Foundation at Gettysburg National Battlefield in Pennsylvania just about a year ago. And one thing I want to say about the context for the poems, especially from Instructions for Seeing a Ghost, is that the ghost metaphor has a multiple sense of meaning in the book. One thing that's important to understand for my work is that I've been partnered with and now married to a Japanese man since the late 1990s. And as I'm sure you know, same-sex marriages through which I would have been able to get him a green card for permanent residency in the United States were only legalized in June of 2015 by the Supreme Court. So now at almost 23, almost 24 years together, the first half of our relationship was filled with uncertainty about his ability to stay in the United States and therefore our ability to stay together, and was marked by a lot of moving around the country because we were only able to obtain temporary 2 and 3 year visas for him until 2006, when we ran out of legal ways to keep him in the United States, and we ended up moving to Canada and qualifying for permanent residency there. And we were in Canada for close to a decade before returning to the US in 2015, when same-sex marriages were legalized here. So even that, though, has had its problems, because now 5 years after returning to the United States, we've only finally been able to get him a permanent unrestricted green card in the United States just last month in August. So the move to Canada in 2006 involved me giving up a career, turning my back on my family, or at least that's the way that they thought it, leaving behind all of my friends, moving to another country that, although culturally similar, I knew no one there. And as I suspected, and it did work out, I would not have been able to work in my field. So I left a position as an English professor, which are not easy positions to get, and we packed up everything, moved to Canada, and lived there for 9 years. So the ghost metaphor has to do with the sense of who I was that I left behind and who I was in the process of becoming in Canada. So the experience is very much like the Mexican playwright Sarah Uribe says, migration is never really leaving home and never really arriving in your home, your new home country, because parts of you are left behind, parts of you are in formation in the new place. And so that sense of ghostness, being unsure of our identities, is one of the metaphors in the book. Also the sense that being immigrants in Canada is similar to being an immigrant in the United States, is that you never are able to fully assimilate into the new society. Avenues professionally that were open to us in the United States were not in Canada because it's such a smaller, less populous place. And the sense that had some things worked out for me with someone else prior to meeting Kenichi, my husband. What would my life have been like had I become married or partnered to an American citizen and never have had to go through all this? So there is a person in the book who appears, who is that person, and I imagine my life, what it would have been like had I stayed with him and never met Kenichi and gone through that immigration uncertainty. Finally, there's some literal ghosts in the book too. During our first couple of years in Canada, in quick succession, 3 years in a row, my sister passed away from cancer quite young. One of her sons the next year passed away from a heroin overdose, and the year following, my older brother passed away after years of issues with opiates and alcohol. So those are literal ghosts that haunt the book. And during those family crises, I was under a lot of emotional pressure to return, to abandon Kenichi, come back to the United States, and somehow be the one who held our family together. That was impossible, but something that I still think about. And there are quite a few poems in the book in which those figures appear. As I start to get ready to start reading here, just want to let you know there might be some jumps in the video because I'm probably going to pause it every once in a while to pull out a poem or take a drink of water, something like that. And this is going to be one of them, and I'll return in a second with the first poem in the book. So this is the first poem in the book. It's called Self-Portrait as the Chosen One, which is an ironic title. It's a poem about the building of family mythology. Self-Portrait as the Chosen One. Long before I was what I am now, short of breath, bald, just returned with arthritic knees from exile in another country's muck and red volcanic soil, too nearsighted to discern the high plains tumbleweed from the burning bush of myth, scorched now and silent. Long before this, I was the first son my mother bore that lived. The first two were named, baptized as they strangled blue and cold in the stillborn canal. Incorruptible halo of hospital lights. But not me. I got dragged through by the forceps in time to cut the cord, unwind the noose of flesh from my pulsing neck. I can't be sure when she first told me this story, this incantation, why they adopted my brother before I was born. Maybe I was 5 or 6. But I heard it so many times it swelled below my skin, a cyst adherent to bone. We were walking on an unweeded path at the edge of some woods, a few blocks from the house, the trees raised later for condos, a strip mall. You're a miracle, she said. You'll do great things. But I haven't. I remember the September grass wilting, the dead leaves, veins crunching underfoot. From that day, I've been lost, wandering through a field of flawed memories and missed signposts. What she should have said is, you will learn even your skin is a borrowed mask. This next poem is called The Subjunctive, and as you probably know, that is the mood of a verb used in English for conditional statements. The subjunctive. Had my brother and I not planted the pine saplings we brought home from school 40 years ago, had we not watered them and spread fertilizer around the roots, the yard of the house we grew up in would not have smothered under a blanket of cracked and fallow needles. Were it not for their height, their naive placement beneath the power lines, too near the neighbor's fences, his widow would not have had them cut to stumps, their irregular rings bared and countable. I wish they were not. Then would I not return there almost every winter, looking for what once was, a bright future coming toward us, we thought, to bathe us in its light like water, not sever us with its lightning like a chainsaw. This next poem is called Waning Gibbous, which is the phase of the moon when it is just almost full. Waning Gibbous. Snow in the clouds that lays across the moon, parting now and then like white lips. How I would like to believe in passion again, wind churning through our bodies, calf muscles seizing. Years ago, I tried to paint you sleeping, after, your mouth almost open like the slats of the blinds above our bed. The small clip of black hair in the cleft of your chest. But I'm no good with fine distinctions. Can't tell the difference between first-degree frostbite and second. For you, I turned my back on everything. My sister dying young, her misshapen, metastatic body choked in a field of scar tissue. The slanted elms, bald and wild in winter, this American forest that had no place for you. In another country, we ate lotus flowers spiced with fennel, the island brushed with snow. A decade later, we drifted back across the northern border, ghosts who knew only their whispered names. This next poem is called Doppelgangers, and it's about an experience that seems to happen to me a lot wherever I go, first to a new place and when I meet new people. Doppelgangers. When I was younger, women often took me aside to say how much I looked like someone else, a dead lover, a son, a brother. Some of my doubles wore glasses or had the same oversized lips. One hanged himself after dinner in the garage. Another forgot his lunch pail and went back through a lumber mill's door minutes before the explosion. Most just went to the drugstore and never came back. Even now, in line at a bookstore or a cafe, a woman will search my face, and suddenly it's the last time anyone saw me alive. I was standing far off on the opposite side of a train platform, wearing a dark suit. Or else, in another city, I was crossing a downtown street against traffic, whistling a tune half remembered, half made up. The book contains a series of love poems to my husband, all of which are named after letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And the early Hebrew alphabet, or Aleph Bet, is or did evolve from attempts to depict with strokes some objects in the physical world. And this first one is called Aleph. The letter looks like this, and people think it was designed to look like the bleached skull of a bull. Aleph. This page once was blank, once was pulp, once was tree. Someone dips a pen in the inkwell and the letter appears. Pictograph of an eye, a skull, which should be bleached white but now is black. Its curved horns point the way to the Pacific cliffs toward the sea. What has a beginning must have an end, you'd think. Draw a line from here across the ocean, it would stop at the Isle of the Dead. Shapes slink toward us through a pinkish, clinging fog. A silent letter begins our names, unpronounceable but for a glottal grunt. I tell you the ancient stories, Jonathan and David, Achilles and Patroclus. Men like us have always been here. If you separate the right glyph from the left, if you deconstruct the letter, the world almost ends. Once this page was blank, but now is not. Text me a photo of your left hand, my gold band circling your finger with half of infinity's ring. This next poem is called Survivor's Guilt. In the weeks before my sister died, I wandered her house in the dark as everyone slept and thought, do something. Her face is clay the surgeons unsculpted. Cancers eating through her like dog piss through ice. I still know how to bargain. The god said, give me what you cannot live without. Muck it like a folded hand on my stone altar. Raise your sharpened knife and cut. I said, take anything, take my books, take these poems I cannot understand you without, or take instead my rootless, improvised life. I was born into it burning. What did I say? I stayed quiet, went to the linen closet and refolded the towels we wiped her forehead with. I stood at her door, listening for a ram's breathing. After a few minutes, I lay on the cot in the spare room, watching headlights from passing cars spill across the wall, illuminating nothing. This next poem is called Leaving Prince Edward Island, July 2015. Prince Edward Island is where we live the majority of the time in Canada, and it's a small island just north and off into the ocean from Maine. Leaving Prince Edward Island, July 2015. As for the Japanese maple, we left it to rot on the porch, its red leaves already streaked with tar spot, and abandoned the bassoon-shaped, stunted lemon tree you kept alive for a year in the wrong climate, the branches forced open by hard, green half-fruit, illegal to cross the American border with fauna or flora or any living thing, not us or the cat or the dog. Such was the debris we left. Watering can, hanging baskets, the plants. Anything other lives could feed on. We left them for the bees, the hummingbirds to drink. No one was waiting for our return from exile, no insect songs we long to hear again. We packed the trailer, abandoned the house. At dusk, we drifted across the bridge to the mainland, the island receding into its foxhole. Don't speak of it now. Some nights you tell me you don't believe we were there at all. I know, it's late. Let's raise another glass of shattered stars to each other. These next two poems are epistolary poems. There are a number of letter poems, postcard poems that run through the book, all addressed to a figure named John, who more or less represents the person I was talking about earlier, that had things worked out, then I would not have met my husband and moved to Canada and all the rest. This first is called Letter to John on the anniversary of Miles Davis's death. What's left of the day accumulates on the counter by the sink. Glasses, mug, a cheap plate streaked with a mark of marinara sauce. Late afternoons spent again by the window, the neighbor boy's novice trumpet calling out like a stepped-on cat. Not one note hits clear. Scales cut the air up and clamber down. Then a lone, true note rings out, hangs high in the trees. When it dissolves, I'm left thinking of Miles's sudden entrance in the middle of Spanish Key, high above the electric piano traffic and guitar, pealing over the bass clarinet. And how, in that long ago summer, we'd lodge the speakers in the windows at night, the backyard sliced in half by the moon, and dance in and out of the shadows, bound like injured birds to the cool grass. Postcard to John, overlooking Barishwa Beach, Prince Edward Island, late May. A little after dawn, here alone. Lightning scribbles on the sky's envelope with disappearing ink, jagged cursive S on opaque nimbus clouds. Everything will be gone once the tide backs out. Minnow pools in the red clay sand, crab husks, live clam maws scattered like discarded wrappers on the beach. This early in the season, the water's still cold enough to numb the feet. Someone's left a pair of runners teetering on a half-submerged rock. Soon they'll tumble into the marram grass in the insistent push of tide, the coming pull of sea. Once we rode each other, then less and less. After 30 years, the beautiful curve of your neck is blurred, but my thigh still burns with the stain your hand left behind. This next poem is also a Hebrew letter poem. It's called Tet, and Tet looks like that. Tet. There's nothing the plague did that we didn't do. We gave our unprotected bodies to strangers too, before we met and burned each other's initials into our arms. Black ink and ash smudge, foreheads anointed the day of fasting. Neither of us knows why he deserved to survive. The virus, a hummingbird hovering above the flower's stamen before gliding off to another bloom. On Granville Island, I, ghost, took you, ghost, to be my lawful, my body still craving to be broken into like a window, yours the rock that smashes. This is another poem about my sister. It's called She Was Always Sleeping Then. For me, you died too slowly. Wall paint drying in humid weather, oil on a wet street, syrup, ink on vellum. No use raising my arms to the god gone deaf, whose language is unanswerable riddles, inscrutable paths of birds in flight. Entrails of a rabbit sliced open like a parcel from the other side. Who says he can read the return address lies. I'm not lying now. Even your Rottweiler was suffering, curled with his head crooked in his arms on the old hooked rug at the foot of your rented hospice bed, exhaling at random intervals. Most days, the home care nurse clucked her tongue and said you were too young. Cancer wouldn't kill you. It'd be the heart or the lungs or the kidneys. Some failure in a system of your body not yet 40. Your spleen rupturing like a water balloon thrown against the side of a barn. You were emptiness inside cupped hands, bruises under a fingernail, a sinkhole opening up after weeks of heavy rain. How else to explain how you were both there and not there, the way one catches a ghost's trick in the corner of the eye? You turn to look, and a tree branch lightly scrapes a lead glass window pane. You turn to look, and nothing's there. You turn to look. All night, your brother hunches forward in the sick room chair, turning to stone and back again. I'm going to read two more of the Hebrew letter poems from the book and then move on to some other work that's newer. This first one is called Zion, which is the seventh letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It looks like this, and it is thought to have evolved from a pictograph of a sword. Zion. Every cycle of 7 is a completion, a wholeness, a ripe blackberry on the cusp of detaching. No hurry, it'll come from its branch when it comes. In the word for sword lies its root, nourishment, food. It's work that gets me through these difficult days. In the yard this evening, acorns are about to drop like little lost earrings. It's not time yet. A raven alights on the fence. Almost he doesn't, but then he does, spreading his black wings out to shake off the rain, or where he's come from the makeshift baths, the pocked puddles that collect in the alley behind the house. Despite the psalm, there will always be a kind of pestilence in the air around us, always the fowler's snare. For bread, for fruit on a vine, more exquisite than gold, we've lain in this grass with our eyes half closed. The lion and the cobra long gone, as summer soon is. Now I take up the shears and prune a still unruined oak branch. Some things grow more handsome the more they're maimed. This poem is called Vav. This is what the letter Vav looks like. It's a letter that, if you attach it to the beginning of the first word in a sentence or clause of classical Hebrew, it stands for the word and, but it's rarely translated that way. Also, this poem makes a reference to the Geniza, which is a receptacle in which you put a damaged sacred text in the Hebrew tradition. Vav. Bury the discarded texts in the Geniza, the one where is inscribed my name before it carried both the one I was born with and the one I took, yours. Take out my social security card, worn and splitting where it was folded, and roll it into a miniature scroll. Take whitewashed jars down from shelves and tuck my birth certificate inside. Seal it with a spell so it never rises again. Hooks of silver, or at least of nickel plate, from which the shower curtain hangs, which encloses where I am washed clean. The conjunctive letter is untranslatable. Here, on a Sunday morning, with a newspaper laid flat on the kitchen table's veneer, hearing your slow rustle and stretch in the bedroom down the hall. As if on cue, the coffee maker beeps. I do not exist without you. I want to tell you this, but I don't. I ask the same silly question every morning. How did you sleep? On the patio, we smoke. The dog pees in the grass. Though we are cracked, bewildered, something still holy moves in the trees. I'm going to read a poem from Out of the Frame, which is the chapbook I wrote while being the poet in residence at the Gettysburg National Battlefield last year. My project there, what I ended up doing, they had me living for a month in one of the original farmhouses that was smack there in the middle of the battle for all 3 days. And from there, my view out the back of the house was toward another farm and a barn that was, this is taken just a little bit closer than where the backyard of the house I was living in was. This is a photograph taken on July 6th, 1863 by a man named Timothy O'Sullivan, and the barn is called the Trossel Barn. You can see there are a number of dead horses in the photograph because obviously as the battle progressed to disable the cannon, the other side would shoot the horses that were dragging them. So this poem is called Photograph of the Trossel Barn by Timothy O'Sullivan, July 8, 1963. A door falls out of the frame. Our song seems to slide off shingles, cloud reaching for its own embrace. What shall be rigid but wood fence, horses that fan behind me like the tail of some strange bird. Bathed in wispy light and framed against the ground, ribs pedaling closed around a breath, red thread wrapped in a bullet slash brightening their throats. After the rain, everything is browned down to one infinite shade. The crop burnt, the charred stalks will thresh again. Whatever we can hold between forefinger and thumb, then vanishing. Whatever it was we had been, who try to go back among the living, with the smell drifting like the sound of a mother weeping, again, the hours trapezing over the ridge of anonymous trees, equine faces grinning forever. What happened before this is still a mystery. Here in my wood-like legs and my green hands, I see all the angles of what went wrong. We're getting older, and when no one's watching, we climb right into it. The force that measles the peach tree will divest and undo us. A door falls out of the frame. In memory, we hit rewind, watch them rise again. One of the good things about being in Tulsa among visual artists is that, like that poem, which is based on a photograph, I've been able to work in other ways in responding to visual artists' work. So this is a new poem. It's from the manuscript that I'm working on this year. And one section of that book is devoted to trying to memorialize, remember, think about the significance of Matthew Shepard, who was murdered and tied, by being beaten and tied to a fence in Wyoming a little over 20 years ago. This poem is called Poem After John Wolfe's Residence in Darko, Oklahoma, and imagines that house transported to Wyoming where Matthew Shepard was born. Here's the painting that is a photorealistic painting that the poem is based upon. Poem After John Wolfe's Residence in Anadarko, Oklahoma, from Matthew Shepard. If we think of time as a whole bolt of cloth we cut swatches from, blue cotton that begins slowly to immediately fray, then for a moment you were the newest well-built thing in the world. The perfect angle of your peaked roof, the unwarped frames of your windows, the glass so clear it almost isn't there. Then those who planned you hanged white curtains, arranged the furniture, the table in the kitchen with its smooth wood legs, the brown leather love seat against the dustless living room wall. The closets grew gray suits, a patterned morning dress with sunflowers, the yellow still brilliantine and deep 20 years before it faded to newly ripe lemon rind. And the bassinet in the other room upstairs, the one whose walls they papered with cartoon race cars. As the body does when it's allowed to grow older, the bones of the house eventually will begin to creak, the plumbing to lose its constant wrestle to contain the push of water that flows like blood through arteries. But that much is the future. As the painter puts away his brush, the canvas filled with another well-made thing, the house you grew up in with its green lawn and shrubs spreading forever out of the frame. No one knows but he how they will beat you and hang you like a picture on a cattle fence outside of town. No one knows you will not live. No one knows he will say, "It could have been me." Once again, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode, this entry in the Badmouth reading series. And I'm going to put a slide up now that tells you what my website is, where you can get a hold of my books if you are so inclined. Thank you again for being here with me. Steve Bellin-Oka. Until next time.